right. Welcome to our panel on blockchain and the Trump administration. Okay, no. Corporate innovation. Welcome, everyone. How's the day going? Good. I'll take that. Everyone's nodding aggressively. Well, it's a pleasure to join all of you. I'm going to introduce myself, then introduce our panelists, and I see their beautiful pictures right in front of me. Excellent. So I am Adam Sterling. I'm the executive director of the UC Berkeley Center on Law and Business. Also teach at Berkeley classes in venture finance and had the honor last semester of teaching the university's first graduate level blockchain course. So that wasn't just a bad joke. To my left, we have Christine Herron from Intel. To Christine's left, we have Jacob Mullins from Shasta. To Jacob's left, we have Risa Stack from GE. And to Risa's left, last but not least, Chris Rogers from Lumia. So let me just, coming from academia, I'm used to picking on the students in my room and making them talk. I won't do that to all of you, but can I just poll the audience? How many entrepreneurs do we have in the room? Okay, we got a few scattered around. How many investors do we have in the room? Nice. And how many corporates? You can raise your hand more than once. Okay, and then everyone else is lost? More or less. Okay, so I think we have a good sense of the audience. Since I think the largest cohort was investors, my first question to everyone, and I think this is a topic that you've probably discussed, the pros and cons of corporate innovation, intrapreneurship, entrepreneurship, but I want us to imagine that we're at a cocktail party with all of these lovely investors, and you're making, why should people in this room care about corporate innovation? Chris, we'll start with you at the end. What's exciting about corporate innovation today?
I think I was supposed to be the skunk at the picnic bad-mouthing corporate innovation, frankly.
You can bad-mouth it.
Yeah, so
what's not exciting?
I don't think it's that exciting. I think at the end of the day, and by the way, I can't see very well, but when I look out there, I see a lot of people on their devices, and usually that means to me it's entrepreneurs, because they're multitasking, and that's awesome. And coming back from a wireless background, I'm super thankful that you're using your device. And then it could be investors, and I think all the corporate VCs are actually watching the panel, which is a good example of the issue. But actually, it isn't the corporate VCs. It's the world they live in that I think is the problem. There are so few companies who can take their balance sheet and turn it into new levels of innovation. Intel is certainly, I mean, like off-the-charts example of somebody who has done it. GE has been pretty darn active and effective, but by and large, it isn't. And I'll just revert back a conversation I was having in the lobby, because I am a wireless guy, and I had been a co-founder of a company here called Nextel, which was probably the last carrier known for innovation, and we sold that 12 years ago to Sprint. So, but if you look at the balance sheets, the revenue, the market caps of the telco, it stacks up pretty well when you consider there are over 300 of them around the world. But the amount of innovation that comes from them is none that I can see. And it's not because they don't have good teams trying to do it. It's because ultimately it is about people and culture, and it starts at shareholders. It starts above that at board, and to get that down to a point where corporations can actually embrace the ideas that are built inside or outside in innovation initiatives is very, very, very difficult.
Chris, can I?
Yeah, these got to be turned on. So.
I think.
You got it?
All right, I think I got it. I completely agree with you. And so at GE Ventures, we tried to do something a little bit different. What we did is we took and we would take ideas, because I ran a team called New Business Creation, and we would take ideas from inside the corporation, and we would get entrepreneurs from outside the corporation to run with the ideas. And then the leadership of, so my team created companies, so the leadership came from Silicon Valley, and sometimes we would have some of the, quote, inventors would go leave the parent and go into the NewCo. So because I think to your point, what we found is the culture was incredibly challenging, but the culture here around us is very good. So, and there are people who are in that culture and don't realize that they're really great entrepreneurs, and you get them into this culture, and they're like, wow, this is awesome. So I think what we did is we just took a method where we put the people, we had a way to kind of ring fence it outside the corporation, but just take all the good ideas and the people and move them into separate companies.
I love it.
So to answer your question, the reason why we care about corporates being involved is because they buy our companies. Liquidity.
Yeah.
And more than that, it's additional investment dollars, it's additional distribution for the companies to be successful. But it's great to see so many companies, especially now, corporate venture capital is at all-time highs, and you see, all these companies are trying to figure out what they should do, and they're becoming cognizant of what they aren't able to do, and that's a good thing for venture capital and startups. Yeah.
And I think that there's a distinction also between innovation in R&D, so Intel Labs or Intel's R&D groups, which are across the organization, and Intel Capital and the investments we're making, right? Those are two very different pieces of innovation. We also have a new technologies group, which is looking at sort of a newer thing that we're doing, looking at what are some concepts we can do and incubate internally. Yeah. And so, some of those pieces are like, I'm going to have to display some geekery. So in World War Z, they've got like that infectious diseases. It's like it's a whole other building, and like there's a long thing in between, so it's separate, and they can shut it off when bad things happen. A lot of corporates treat their innovation groups almost like that infectious diseases lab, where if something goes awry, it can be sealed off from the rest of the company, and it can't affect it. It doesn't touch too much of the balance sheet. It's been carved off. And so that becomes a big challenge when you actually want innovation sort of as a learning organization or in a growth mindset, or pick your consulting buzzword of the day. And so if you're looking for organizational innovation, that's one piece. If you're looking for gap-filling technologies, finding out where there might be a new market for some core technology you're developing, those are very different ways to think about innovation. So I don't know that there's one pat answer to that question. And it's also very different for a GE or an Intel, which is heavily hardware driven. So our cycle times, a failed innovation for us is very expensive. Yeah. That's very different from IAC, which can do a Tinder. If that didn't work out, they wouldn't have spent nearly the kind of money that we would have spent on a new concept.
So I think it's a fair point. We can't look at corporations as these kind of static, singular entities. They're complex, and we should approach it from many angles. And I want to pick up on a point that Jacob said, and I train entrepreneurs, investors, and I'm constantly saying that I think corporates are one of the most overlooked stakeholders within the ecosystem. So they serve as investors providing capital, customers, massive with any enterprise business, and then, as Jacob said, acquire. So if we can wall off the challenges with corporations creating their own innovation, their own products, can we talk a bit about how the investors, the entrepreneurs in the room how should corporates be part of their growth strategy? Risa, do you want to kick us off? You've been on the Kleiner-Perkins side, so you've been on the financial and strategic VC. How do you think of your advising just a startup and an enterprise business, or how should they think about corporates as part of their strategy? Yeah,
I think that, and I say it as you say, I've worn multiple hats, and I think one of the things is you should see corporates as, maybe giving you, if they're really good, they can give you insight into their customers. Right, and we've done that with a number of different companies. Like one of the first companies, I think it's called Catalent now. We were the first corporate customer, and so they had no idea how to work with a corporate. And so we basically, the woman on my team who worked on it, spent hours and hours just telling them how to interface, because trying to work with a big corporate like GE is incredibly difficult. So I think if you have the corporates can be incredibly helpful about understanding your customers and your products and your business, but it really depends who the person is from the corporate. GE Ventures is staffed with mostly people who were financial investors who came over the corporate side, so we know about building companies. We've got people who were at Arch Venture Partners, MDV, I was at Kleiner, so there's a bunch of us who are company builders, and we really understand that value. So I think that's a really important thing, and we've seen it work really well, but sometimes it doesn't work very well, just because we've had it where we did a deal and then we sold the business. GE sold the healthcare IT business, and the companies that were interacting with the healthcare IT people were like, so what happens now? We're like, well, we'll figure it out, but so there are some nuances of dealing with corporates.
Yeah, Chris?
I think one thing that is interesting about this conference and this audience is that it's global. And we also invest in a number of markets around the world. And I think there is a little bit of a nuanced reaction there. I probably had 4 pitches from folks here in my office today, and often they're coming at it with what they perceive as the Silicon Valley attitude of black or white. Gosh, no way we want a strategic in this round because it'll poison the well. And in fact, there, back to Jacob's point about money, raising capital in these markets is so complicated, and to keep that lofty goal of landing a Silicon Valley VC, which is so unlikely to happen back in Istanbul or other places, I say take the money, and then if you can get some added benefit, get it, and if you can avoid a commercial relationship that is contingent, the investment and the commercial relation are contingent upon each other, avoid that, but definitely look at them as a great source of capital and probably more sophisticated customer information and infrastructure than you're going to find elsewhere in those markets.
I think people don't necessarily appreciate that. As a corporate investor, I don't want to place my money into a company where I can't also add strategic value. That's a waste of my time.
Sure.
You know, our dollars are much better spent if we're going to get, you know, a double lever on the success of the company. And if I can't be impactful both with my money and my time just as an individual investment partner and, you know, board support and that sort of thing, you know, there's that. But then I also need to be able to provide corporate support. And we're best served with the allocation we have for investments, doing it where we can also provide corporate support.
And to a point you said earlier, I mean, Intel, Google, others have I think, been effective, whether it's marketing, whether it's creating actual firewalls of creating this perception in the ecosystem that it's not strategic dollars. I mean, is it truly walled off, or how does it, tell us a bit of how it works?
Yeah, and I think this is true not only for a strategic investor, but also for anyone who's got any kind of mission-based investing. So I was in Omidyar Network, which is mission-based. There are a lot of diversity funds out there, which, you know, have somewhat of a mission base. And the way to think about it is there's an initial filter, which is not much different from saying, okay, you know, that particular VC is an enterprise investor. They want enterprise SaaS. Saying that investor only wants enterprise SaaS is really no different than saying that, you know, Omidyar Network is about access to finance, or saying that Intel is looking for, you know, connected car.
Yeah.
You know, we've chosen sectors that are relevant to us for different reasons. Our reason happens to be it affects our core business.
Yeah.
And so I think you get past that filter, and then you're into the financials, right? Then it's a fairly straightforward financial relationship. And so it's not one or the other. I mean, everyone does some filtering. I don't think you meet many investors who will invest in just any category you happen to slap down on the desk.
Yeah. Jacob, as a investor, how do you help your portfolio companies think about exit strategies? Should they be thinking about the corporates in their vertical from day one? Should they be meeting with them even if they're not taking investments? You've got a ton of investors in the room. How do you help your companies engage with corporates as potential acquirers?
Yeah, so apropos, because I've been at Shasta for 2 years, but before that I had a company, actually a 500-backed company, called Exit Round, and it's actually still around. So
That was like one of the coolest concepts ever.
So thank you. So Exit Round, and that's actually probably why I'm sitting here, is because of Exit Round.
Give us the pitch. Let's hear it.
So Exit Round is a AI-powered marketplace for mergers and acquisitions. So bringing two sides together, corporates on one side, entrepreneurs and companies on the other, and using an AI matching algorithm in the middle to match and kind of suggest who people should talk to. And so we launched that in 2013, and within the first week we had 300 corporates signed up, and within the first month we had 500, and after 4 years of it, we have 10,000 corporates now signed onto it. And so there's a tremendous demand for corporate interest. Now, as I would talk to entrepreneurs, both in the 500 portfolio as well as just around, founders often say, no, first of all, I don't want to talk about potential acquisition because I'm building my company for the long run. And two, I don't want to poison the well. And what I said is, guys, you need to just have relationships with everybody. Yeah. And so what I counsel people to do, and so even portfolio companies now, is make a list of all of your competitors, both startups and large companies, and all of your partners, both startups and large companies, and go meet all of them and have active conversations with them. No, don't give away the farm, but know what they're doing, and more importantly, they'll know what you're doing, so that when they have a particular need for distribution or a gap solution or acquisition, you're on their list, you're top of mind, they're familiar familiar with your team, they've seen you execute in market, and they can actually do something relatively quickly. So I am a huge proponent of building relationships early.
Anything else? Like, Risa, does engaging with you mean that GE is a more likely acquirer of a business?
Yeah, because one of the things I think, having not worked in a corporate until I worked at GE, I just didn't realize how much if you were in a corporate setting, how much, and especially a big company like GE, it's all about making the quarter, right?
Sure.
And so you can't spend a lot of time talking to startup companies or talking to even other larger companies that you want to acquire, because you generally are driving and focused on making the quarter. So one of the really great things is through the investments, it's just like they get knowledge that some of these companies exist and that these spaces. So, and as they're thinking about their strategic plan for their business, and what I did is I interacted with the CEOs of all the large businesses at GE, and we would have days where we would have all the companies come in, and we'd have the CEOs of the businesses come in, and like, wow, somebody's doing this, or and so that was it was really very educational, and I think we have had companies get acquired because that they met the CEO in one of those forums. So I think it's really important. And what, if you're busy in your startup, you don't realize you're out networking, that the corporate folks are mostly networking with each other inside the company. They don't spend a lot of time looking outside.
Yeah, Chris?
I think one of the real, another thing we should dispel is that they can't show a little leg, because you get, again, some of this black and white, particularly not to stereotype, but among this global audience. And by the way, I'm noticing that I think some of the corporate VCs are now entrepreneurial because they're multitasking on their devices.
You'd be a great professor, Chris. I mean, just like,
thank you for
we got to bring you back to campus.
But the likelihood that somebody pitching you is going to reveal some secret that you're going to run back into the company and talk about is
we can't execute anyway. We can't. A corporate can't execute on your great idea.
So I think it's.
And if you can beat them, they probably weren't the right team to do it.
That fear is misplaced.
Totally.
But it stops so many people. They set this arbitrary line that we can't do that because they're going to copy us. That is something to get over and get into these corporations for all these same reasons and don't avoid it.
I think. Again, I don't think everyone realizes, but most corporate investors actually sign mutual non-disclosure agreements. So, for example, I don't, when I'm wearing the official hat, I don't look at confidential information unless we've done a mutual NDA. Now, I am, queen of the friend-DA, so there's that. But generally, that's something that we do, and we do that in part, I think, to protect those big balance sheets.
Yeah.
If we happen to develop a product, we want to be able to show exactly what was shared and so forth. So there is protection for folks that do have that concern.
Great. So I think I'm going to go to the audience now. So I volunteered for my exercise to run around and ask questions. So let's see. You guys can raise your hands.
Professor.
Yeah. How we doing? Okay. I see one right here. Yeah. Was that not a? Okay. And I'm looking for other hands. Back here. Great.
So, thank you. As a founder, when communicating to raise financing, you mentioned having the end goal in mind. So, say you're looking at being, acquired or something like that. Would you say, all right, we're going to look at getting acquired by so-and-so company in 2 years, and we've been communicating with them since this day? Is that something you would like to see as an investor, or
That's part of your pitch?
You mean? No. I'm just asking.
Saying you're wondering if that should be part of your pitch.
Yes.
Like that. And I would say one specific name and a path like that sounds misdirected. For me, though, I think if you said, and we're keeping in touch with these 5 companies as one potential exit strategy, that sounds more realistic to me. And positive.
Yeah, so the simple answer is no, don't do that. Because if we were to have interest in buying you, we would just make an offer to buy you. If we're investing in you, it's because we'd like to see you scale and grow. And so it's absolutely wonderful for you to talk about, these are the companies we are working with to adopt our platform. And then you have, these 5 big companies that could potentially be acquirers, but I certainly don't want to hear about those relationships in the context of you're looking to get done. Right.
The other way to say it is to say we have strategic distribution relationships and you name all the big players, and what I hear is, okay, good, they're keeping every option open, and those companies know who they are.
All right, we're back here.
So a lot of companies everybody talks about, oh, disruption. We want disruptive technology. What's the next big thing? How disruptive is too disruptive? If you're developing something that's completely outside the box, off the curve, do you feel that these are companies that will still get looked at?
Well, it really kind of depends on how strategic is, because a lot of large companies have, 3 to 5 year plans, and if what you're doing is totally out of the box, but is somewhere in that ecosystem that a large company is thinking about, then that becomes relevant. But there's really no way for you to figure that out until you pitch them, because large companies like GE, and I'm sure my colleagues at other large companies, we don't disclose what the CEO of the aviation business's 5-year plan is, and so you would just it would be almost it would be really kind of opportunistic that it turned out that that's part of the strategy. But I guess I would encourage you to talk to corporates, even if you think what you're doing is kind of way out there. So, for example, we started a company that because my group starts companies, which is we use drones to inspect equipment, and that came from inside. And the people who were doing it, the CEO thought, God, this is 10 years out. But as soon as we backed them and took them out of the greater GE, is wow, this is really cool. So I think just you show up and pitch your idea, and don't think it's too far out of the box. It could be on their roadmap.
I'm back here, and then we've got one more question.
You talked about getting in touch with your competitors at an early stage. Isn't it better to focus on your product, your customers, and honing that instead of talking to your competitors and learning their secrets or even trading it? And I understand what you were saying about if there's a need, they'll reach out to you, but in reality, how much does that happen? And I mean, isn't it as a founder better to just focus on your product and making it better and differentiating it from others and not focusing on what your competitors are doing? Who cares about that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Absolutely focus on your product. You need to make the best product possible for your customers, for potential acquirers, potential investors. But knowing where people are and having relationships with those that are around you are still a valuable exercise.
All right, final question.
So I've been in large corporations and done a lot of M&A, and one of the things I've observed, at least sort of anecdotally in my own experience, is the acquisitions that were actually closer to our ongoing roadmap were much more successfully integrated. Those which we thought would be disruptive, change our direction, were typically disasters. And so this idea that you want to look for that disruptive innovation as a large corporate to go and maybe think of acquisition of change, to me, doesn't resonate very much. I was wondering if you had a comment on that.
Before you do, for Oliver, I'm going to come back up and I'm going to ask you a final question. I want each of you to predict 5 years from now at pre-money, what's going to be a hot topic that we're going to be discussing? What's going to be the panel? So answer that question, but think about that, and we'll end there.
I'll answer that really quickly and let my colleagues comment. Completely agree. You can't. When GE tries to acquire disruptive companies, it's much more challenging. If it's closer to the core, it's better. But like I said, my group starts companies outside. So we actually took the disruptive folks, put them outside, work with them for a couple of years, and then it comes back in when it's, quote, less disruptive but more mature. But yes, I completely agree. It's very hard.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that if you're making that kind of, I assume you mean acquisitions, not just investing, right? So if you're talking about an acquisition, that would certainly be something that would, be a fairly freestanding entity underneath the corporate umbrella, and it would either be a new category that the company was going into, so there really isn't a disruption internally, it's more externally into that ecosystem, or if it was internal, it would probably be part of a larger shakeup, and there would certainly be other transition issues that would impact it, right? Because a bunch of other people probably got fired.
Okay, so we're going to start with my question. So 5 years from now, pre-money conference, what is one thing we're going to be talking about? You've got funds that have longer life cycles than 5 years. You've been making these predictions. Chris?
Well, I'm going to go at it slightly differently because I just happen to have been pitched today by a company in the AR/VR space. So I don't think 5 years from now we're going to be sitting here having this conference.
Nice.
I think we're going to be,
Oh, that's a very
Well
back to the
done.
future
I didn't give him
answer.
that in advance. That's well played.
so there's
Yeah.
that.
God, okay, that's a hard one. I guess for me, what I'd really like to see is that a lot of the sleepy industrial businesses are really starting to move to more taking the tools that we use as consumers or a lot of the software companies use and incorporate them into their businesses, because there's a lot of industrial businesses that are just, it's just so hard to get those technologies in. I'd love to see that in that topic of we have all these different automated things in aviation and transportation.
Yeah, great.
I'll say ethics and attention that's been caused because of augmented reality. So when you have digital objects existing in physical space, that real estate becomes infinite, and you have infinite worlds of digital opportunity in this room. So how do we both do that safely to protect each other, but also do that to protect ourselves where we're just not overwhelmed?
And can you get my kids to stop buying V-Bucks?
Christine.
Yeah, I think there's fracturing of attention that's happening as far as personal attention, because you have future of work issues, you have things happening around blockchain and sort of pushing investments down into where people can now go participate in things, and you have things happening around diversity and inclusion, all of which mean there's going to be a lot of changes to the workplace, sort of a lot of changes to how we invest and how we engage with new companies, and so I think it's going to be a big change across lots of categories.
Great. And I'll go with the implosion of Stanford University. No, I'm just kidding. Love Stanford. We're frenemies. Thank you all. This was a lot of fun. Thank you all to
Wrong crowd, buddy. Wrong crowd.
Go Bears. And this was a blast.